Welcome to our new Bible study. This Bible study is going to be looking at what's called the Table of Duties. This is something that's found in Martin Luther's Small Catechism, and I know that title does not exactly bring forth a lot of enthusiasm. Oh yes, I've always been wanting to study the Table of Duties. What does that even mean? Well, a table is simply, a chart, a listing of different categories, and in this case is different Bible verses within those categories. And the duties part just means that these Bible verses are going to tell us what are our responsibilities, what are our duties in different areas of our life. And again, I know that doesn't sound too exciting, but please stick with me because I think you'll find that this is going to help you immensely in your daily life, because those categories are actually the most important roles that each of us play in our lives. Things like being a spouse or a child or being a citizen or a ruler, and many more things like that. Stick with me and you're going to find out that God has ordered his creation in a beautiful way to make sure that we are well cared for, and also to remind us always about Jesus and his love for the church. That last part we'll have to get to in just a little bit, but stick with me through this first part as we look at exactly what this table of duties is. As I was getting ready to begin to record this Bible study, I was trying to figure out exactly how to show you the table of duties, and I decided I'd use the website, which is catechism.cph.org. And this is one of the places you can find Martin Luther's Small Catechism online. And it's a very good thing to do, to go and review some of those basics of the faith. But when I went there, I noticed they had actually just redesigned the website since the last time I had visited. And so if you look at this, you'll notice that when we look at Martin Luther's Small Catechism here on the homepage of this website, there are just these 6 boxes. Now, those of you that are sort of familiar with Martin Luther's Small Catechism, you'll understand that these 6 boxes are what we often refer to as the 6 chief parts of the Catechism. We have the 10 Commandments. We have the Apostles' Creed, we have the Lord's Prayer, we have the Sacrament of Holy Baptism, we have Confession, and we have the Sacrament of the Altar. But really, when you look at the front page now of the website here, it looks like that's all that's in the Catechism, but that's simply not true. And don't worry, they didn't take away anything. You just have to get there a little different way. So if you click on the 10 Commandments, yes, it'll take you here into the 10 Commandments and their meaning, and some other explanations of those things. But if you go into the fuller menu here, all of a sudden you'll see, wait, there's an introduction, but that's not what we're looking for. But after we get past these 6 chief parts, there's also 3 other basic parts to the Catechism. There's a series of prayers that are given to us for morning, for evening, for meal times and such. There's then this thing called the Table of Duties. That's what we're going to talk about in a second. And then we're going to talk about, and then there's this other part that talks about Christian questions with their answers, which for now we'll just say is a series of questions and answers to help you prepare to receive the Lord's Supper in true repentance and faith. But this is what we want to look at in this Bible study, is this Table of Duties. So let's click on that. And what we'll see here is the title for the Table of Duties first. It says, certain passages of Scripture for various holy orders and positions, admonishing them about their duties and responsibilities. And one time when I wrote about the Table of Duties, I said, man, if you want somebody not to read something, this would be a great title, right? You just read this and you think, what is this even talking about? So we get certain passages of scriptures, okay? So we're going to get scriptures that are kind of listed for us. Then it says, for various holy orders and positions. But what do we mean about holy orders and positions? Well, you might think when you hear holy orders at first, you might think something like, well, that's the pastors. Or back in Martin Luther's day, these are the monks, right, that are going into these various religious orders. Those are the holy orders and positions. That's what we're talking about. But no, one of the great things that Martin Luther restored to the church was the teaching of vocation, which is this idea that no matter what work you are doing in life, so long as it's not a sinful way of life, God is indeed using you for the benefit of others in his order of creation. And therefore, everything is a holy order and position. If you're a husband, that's a holy order and position. If you are a pastor, that's a holy order and position. If you're a lay person in the church, that's a holy order and position. All of these things are listed here. And so that's what we'll see. This is not just something about perhaps what pastors should do. It's about what all of us should do in our various callings, our various vocations in life. And then we're told, though, that this is going to admonish us. It's going to encourage us. It's going to exhort us about what our duties and responsibilities are in regards to these various positions. As we look through this, you'll see various holy orders and positions listed, right? You've got to bishops, pastors, and preachers. You've got the hearers of the word, right? Asking what do hearers owe their pastors. You've got civil government. Then you've got citizens. You've got to husbands, and then to wives. You've got to parents, and then to children. You've got to workers of all kinds, and then you've got to employers and supervisors. You've got a few general things here at the end, to youth, to widows, and to everyone. I want you to, though, realize here that the first, many of these holy orders that are listed are actually in pairs, right? We have pastors, and we have their people. And we come down here, we have the government and their citizens. We have husbands and their wives. We have parents and their children. We have workers and their bosses. And those are the ones we're probably going to spend most of our time on in this Bible study. We're going to be looking at these pairs of holy orders and positions and asking why they are arranged in the way they are. Asking why are the responsibilities of each one of those things the way they are. And I'll show you a chart here just in a little bit that'll help us to begin to understand exactly the kind of relationships that we're looking at in regards to these various positions, these various holy orders. Yes, there are these others, right? To youth, to widows, to everyone. But those are more kind of general things that are listed at the end, and we're going to focus on these first ones. But I want you to think for a couple seconds about this list. Think about all these different roles, and think about how much of your time as a Christian person is wrapped up in one of these roles, right? If you're at church or you're doing something in relationship to the church, you're either the pastor leading that or you're a hearer of the word. And that takes up, right, a portion of your life, hopefully a decent portion of your life if you're a Christian. Again, when you're out in the world, we're always dealing with government and with citizens. Whether we're watching the news, whether we're voting, whether we're speaking to others about how we feel about things in our country or other countries, these are the kind of topics that are going to come up. Obviously, if we are married, our roles as husbands and wives, that's an interaction that we have so many times a day, hopefully, right? Hopefully we're not avoiding each other or too busy to spend time with each other. But if we are in the home, we're going to constantly, husbands are going to be dealing with their wives and wives with their husbands, okay? And then parents and children, again, if there are still children, particularly in the home, although this extends even after children have left the home to some extent, it changes. But again, parents and children, that's a lot of our life. And then our work, right, that we go about each day. When you really think about it, these things are the things that fill up almost every moment of our days. And if that's true, then we don't want to just say, oh, what table of duties? That sounds boring. Or certain passages of Scripture for various holy orders and positions, admonishing them about their duties and responsibilities. That sounds torturous. No, we want to say, God has told us what to do in these relationships that fill up our whole day. I want that wisdom. I want to know how to live in these relationships in a God-pleasing way, but also not just God-pleasing in the sense of trying to do what he says, but also we want to please God because we understand when we please God, we are also living in his wisdom. We're living in his ways, and his ways are good for us, right? So if husbands are doing what they're told to do, this is going to be good for them and for their wives, and vice versa. So I hope you'll stick with us on this Bible study as we talk about the table of duties, because I think these things are things that we largely ignore in the scriptures anymore, and we'll talk about. Some of them make us uncomfortable, what the scriptures say about these different orders, but we'll talk about the why when we get there. But I hope you'll stick with me, because this is stuff that you will use every day, and it tells us exactly how God says we are to walk in these ways in order to have his blessing upon our life, and in order to receive the blessings of walking in the way in the order that he's created. I want to show you now in this first introductory video one chart that's going to help us start to understand a little bit more about the relationship between these various holy orders and positions, and then give you a hint of where we're going in the end about why God has arranged things in the way that he has. So let's go ahead and turn now to that chart. All right, you see now before you this chart, which is something that I've created to help us understand the table of duties a little bit better. You'll see there at the top sort of these three big circles, and then little circles within each of them. Then at the bottom are actually the verses that are recorded in Luther's Small Catechism for each of those positions. I'll show you a little bit of that here just in a little bit. But what we really want to understand is that the table of duties, as we find it in Martin Luther's Small Catechism, and we'll talk about this more later, also as we find it in the Holy Scriptures, right? Often, when we kind of get into a passage that talks about, say, husbands and wives, in many places where we do that, then it's also going to go on and talk very quickly after that about things like parents and children, bosses and workers, rulers and citizens, pastors and people. And we might say, well, why are all those lumped together? Well, we're going to learn that in this Bible study, why those things often in the scriptures are kind of listed one after another. But the first thing I want you to understand from this chart is this idea of those three big black circles. Throughout time, the people that have sort of talked about the world, whether that be theologians or even philosophers, have sort of understood that we live out our life in three areas, in three estates. We have the estate of the home, we have the estate of the church over here, and we have the estate of the state here, the community, living together in communities with rulers and citizens and things like that. So we have the home, the state, and the church. Within each of these areas, then we'll have these critical relationships. But before we get on to talking about those, I want to talk about one thing in regards to these three estates. If this is something you've studied before, a lot of this will make perfect sense to you. But if it's not, you might look at this and say, okay, you're telling me there are these three areas I live out my life. And again, I just challenge you now to think through. Pick out any part of your day and kind of some sort of interaction you have. And tell me, does that not relate to your life at home, or to your life in the state or the community, or to your life in the church? Now, in modern thinking, when I've shown this to other people, they'll kind of say, well, wait a second, we're missing one big thing, which is work, right? We often think of, we have home life, we have work life, we have community life, and we have church life. That's fine. If we wanted to try to add another circle, we could do that here. But I think it's instructive for us to understand why there is no category for work. That's a big black circle on this chart. Why is that? Well, you'll actually see here that in the home, we have bosses and workers listed here. And really, up until very modern times, most work was very closely related to the home, in the sense of most times it was actually conducted there on the premise of the home, right? Whether you were a blacksmith or a farmer or a carpenter. In most cases, right, those workplaces were very much right there on the home. This is, if you remember, some of you might be a little bit older. We used to have classes in school called home economics, right? And this kind of was based on this idea that kind of everything centered around the home as far as our work, our relationships together. This was all together. It's not a huge issue if you want to sort of think of work, by itself, because we have it different. But I think we're instructed here that actually the best way to think about work is in connection to the home. Not necessarily, again, that we have to be doing our work in the home, although obviously we've had some movement back that way, that even people, are working remotely in their homes doing various jobs. But just this idea that really when we think about work, it should be thought of as sort of a family operation, right? People often who really like their jobs, in fact, will say, oh, I like working at this place because it feels like a family. And again, if we have bosses who sort of treat their employees more like family than they do just cogs, that would be good. And if we have workers who show respect, right, to their bosses, like they would show respect to the father or the mother in the home, that is good as well. But that's sort of a side note, so I'll try to move on from that now. For the purposes of our discussions, we're just going to use these three sort of historic estates or areas of life. Home, in which we, again, have bosses and workers there. We can talk about this too. This is also perhaps where we would place teachers and students in the home. In our modern day, often we think of that within the state, but again, we don't have time to go into all the specifics now, but we're kind of talking about all that happening in the home, and then we have this life together in community, characterized by those who have authority in the community and those who are the citizens living under that authority, and then we have in the church, we have pastors and people, right? So let's look, though, at those relationships again. So as we start over here, we have husbands and wives, and then we have parents and children, we have bosses and workers, we have rulers and citizens, we have pastors and people. Note that there's kind of this dividing line through the center, and that's intentional, where you see the green and the red here also indicating this. The point is, when we look at all of these people that are on the top of this line, or up here in the green section, the Bible consistently says that these people are ones given authority by God. Okay, they are given authority in order to do things in these relationships. And so, again, sometimes we have to admit, when we first hear just these things in their plainness, they kind of strike us as odd with our modern thinking. But just to be said here clearly, the Bible teaches consistently that husbands have been given authority in regards to their wives. Parents are given authority in regards to their children. Bosses are given authority in regards to their workers, rulers in regard to their citizens, and pastors in regard to their people. So these people down here then, we can talk about this two ways. I put it the positive way here because I really think it is a positive. These people are people that have been given one with authority to watch over them, and therefore are to respect those people. We could say given to live under the authority of these people, but the point is, if you have someone who has authority that watches over you and does things for you, that's not a burden, right? If you have a great father who takes care of your needs, who helps you, right, throughout life, you don't go, oh man, I hate that guy that has authority over me. No, you say, thanks be to God that I have someone that provides for me, that counsels me, that does all of these things. And so these people, right, again, have one given to them with authority to watch over them. So the wife, again, has been given a husband. The children have been given parents. Workers have been given their bosses. Citizens have been given their rulers, and people have been given their pastors in the church realm. And all of this then is how God has ordered this. How do we know this? And how do we know that, there's this certain list of people kind of on the top here and the certain list of people on the bottom as far as the chart? Well, because when we read the scriptures, we see that the people on the top are spoken of as people with authority, and they're told how to use that authority. And again, the people on the bottom here are spoken of as people who need to honor and respect someone who has been given authority over them. And we'll see that as we progress in this Bible study. But again, if you look up a husband in the Bible and what they're to do, you're going to find talk of authority, and you're going to talk about what they're to do with that authority. Same thing if you go over to pastors, right, or rulers. That's the discussion that's going to be happening. Whereas if you go over to citizens, there's going to be talk of submission. And if you go over to lay people in the church, there's going to be talk of obeying. If you go to children, right, honor your father and mother. There's all these things. So we do see that there's a relationship between all of these people that are either given authority or given one with authority to watch over them. But this is God's design. This is his, remember we said holy order, right? This is how he has designed things. And this is how not only do we do these things because God has said you should, but we do them because we understand when God says you should, he's giving us his wisdom. He's telling us what is good, not just in terms of what he says, but also just good in terms of our own lives. Thankfully with God, those things are always the same. God never tells us to do something that's bad for us, right? He tells us to do things precisely because they are good for us. And he mourns when we do things he tells us not to do, not just because we rebelled against him, that too, but ultimately because we're choosing to do things that are bad for us rather than living in his good ways. Okay? So as we look at this, we see these three areas of life, right? We see these different relationships, these five kind of key relationships listed here, or pairings of relationships. And then we see that in each of those, there's one person given authority by God and one called to live under that authority with thanksgiving and rejoicing that one has been given to watch for them. And so this chart then is going to just tell us, hey, husbands, here's what you're supposed to do. Wives, here's what you're supposed to do. Pastors, here's what you're supposed to do, and so forth. But the final question I want to deal with today is this question of why would God order creation this way? Is it that, God has said, well, husbands have to have authority over their wives because husbands are really, really smart and never make any mistakes, and wives don't have such intelligence and make bad decisions all the time. No, that's not what it's saying. God orders these things in this way for a particular reason that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the nature of any of these people. Again, as we go through, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. That's obviously not saying that there's no distance or there's no differences between husbands and wives that make this order good. There are, but it's not like there's a deficiency in all the people on the bottom and there's some sort of greatness about the people on the top in and of their nature. No, God has organized this way for a very important reason. I'm going to give you just 1 second as I'm kind of changing the screen here to think through, why do you think that is? Why does God have his whole world organized in relationships where one person has authority and one person doesn't? You might say, well, because, this is what works well. And indeed it does, right? That you kind of have to have somebody take the lead. I mean, think about going to war and not having a commander. That would be a very bad situation indeed. If each soldier is just told, get out there and do whatever you think is best, that would be really bad. Again, if children were just told, there are no rules, do whatever you want in the household, that would be very bad. So we might say functionally this just works, and indeed it does. But we want to look at the overall reason. I'm going to kind of skip through here on my presentation when I'm doing this. I usually am stopping at some of these passages here and discussing them, which we'll do later. But for now, I want to get to this other screen over here. When we look at this and say why, here's the answer. The answer is because this is the same relationship that we find between God and his people, or to put it in more New Testament terms, it is the relationship that we see between Christ and his church. If you noticed on all those other categories of relationships that we had back here. I can go back for 1 second. The one thing I maybe didn't say as we went through this is we can become uncomfortable with this talk of authority. Again, when we say husbands have authority over their wives, some people right away kind of tense up and say, what are you saying? Isn't that an old-fashioned idea? Whatever. And they say, this is going to be bad if we give authority to someone. Particularly, right, when we think about this in our own American context. Our history as a country has a lot to do with response to authority, right? We started off, we had this king, and we believed the king was doing things that were unfair at the very least, unjust, right? And so therefore we broke away from that. If you look at even more recent history, right, in our country, if you look at kind of the times of the 60s and the 70s, one of the main slogans of that time was question authority. And when you look at taking it up to this day and age, 2025, we notice that any talk of authority is just almost, again, it almost gives people a feeling of discomfort, a feeling of disgust even. So we have this, in America in particular, I think we have this real distrust of authority in general. But this is the part I kind of forgot, and better go over it real quick, and then we'll go back to the other screen. But we see here on this chart, these people that are given authority, when we ask why are they given authority, it's never in the Bible given that these people are given authority in order that they can make their own life better, that they can just sit back and do nothing. No, they're given authority always to love and to serve the people down here. So husbands, why do you have authority? Is it so your life is as easy as possible? No, it's so you can love and serve your wife, your children, right? Bosses, why are you given authority? It's so that you can make your workers' lives as good as they can be, right? Think about that. So the person with authority always loves and serves, and then the person under authority, right, always respects and obeys. That's always the general kind of instruction given. And the further we get into this, the more you'll see, right? It is not a trouble for husbands to have authority if they're using that authority to love and serve. That's not a bad thing. That's an awesome thing, right? And so forth. Rulers, if they're using to love and serve, that's a good thing to have a ruler that does that. Martin Luther goes on and on in certain places in his writings about the blessings of rulers and how if we didn't have rulers, right, our countries would be overrun and would be, just places of complete chaos and things like that. So if they're loving and serving, that's great. Now, again, if any of these people decide I'm going to be a tyrant and I'm just going to do what I want, well, yeah, it's going to break this whole order because that's never what God gave them to do. Again, how do we know that? All right, let's go back to this side. This is what God does. God has all authority, right? Or again, to put it in the New Testament sense, Christ has all authority in heaven and on earth. It's all his. He has all of this authority. But here's the question. What does he do with it? Does he just use it for himself? Does he use it just for his pleasure or his glory? No, he actually uses it to love and to serve his people, his church, right? Isn't that beautiful that we see this here? And then when we get over here, when we talk about us, God's people, or the church in relationship to Christ, we're going to talk about this idea that we are to submit, right? Most often when we're told how we're to relate to God, we're to honor him, we're to obey him, we're to respect him, we're to do his commandments, we're to recognize the wisdom of his statutes and precepts, right? This is our responsibility. So all of these relationships give us a little picture of this relationship, and that's wonderful. We know this for certain in the case of husband and wife. In the book of Ephesians, the Apostle Paul reveals this. He says that husbands and wives, right, are a picture of Christ and the church. That husbands are playing the role of little Christ in their marriage, loving and serving their wives. And likewise, right, that wives, when they are given their responsibilities, they are to act like the church in relationship to Christ. They are to honor and love and help and submit to their husbands. So we are told very explicitly that husbands and wives, this is the way that it works, and that God has designed this in this way to give us a picture of Christ and the church. And so when we ask, why does the husband have authority and the wife does not? Well, we might say in the most simple sense that that is because when we talk about Christ and the church, Christ has authority and the church does not. That's the relationship we see there. So somebody sort of had to play the role of Christ and somebody had to play the role of church. And God had decided that husbands would play the role of Christ and wives would play the role of the church. Here's my contention for you, though. While Ephesians tells us that this is absolutely why God has designed marriage this way, I argue that all these others are designed in the same way, right? That if we were over here in the realm of pastors and people, that this also gives us a picture of Christ and the church, right? So much so that, again, if a child at church were to say, well, we just heard all these sermons about how much God loves us, but what exactly does that mean, mom or dad? They should be able to look and say, if things are going ideally, right, or as close to ideally as we can in this world of sin and still with the flesh hanging around, causing trouble in our lives, that we should say, do you see how pastor takes care of us, that he spends time coming to visit us, to listen to us, and to preach to us the truth of God? Well, that's how God loves us. He speaks to us truth. He listens to us in prayer. He gives us counsel, right? So the pastor becomes a picture of God, of Christ. And the people then, if we were to say, well, what are the people supposed to do then, mom and dad? What's our role if that's what the pastor's doing? Well, we're to act, right, like the church in relationship to Christ. We're to try to listen to our pastor. We're to try to heed his counsel. We're to be persuaded as he talks to us about various things. We'll get into the specifics of all that later, but for now it's enough to say that each of these relationships, I believe, are the same as husband and wife in that they give us this wonderful little earthly picture of what's going on in the greatest sense between God and us. Namely, that God has all authority, that he uses it to love and serve us and save us, and therefore we live a life of submission to God, to Christ. We honor him, we respect him, we give thanks for him, and we seek to do everything he says. All right, I know that's a lot of stuff, but that's what we're going to be talking about in this Bible study. We're going to be talking both about just the specific verses that are listed for each of these roles, but always keeping in mind this bigger idea that God has given us a picture of Christ and the church in these other roles. And in order to do that, he's arranged all of these relationships with one person having authority in order that they might love and serve the others, and the others have been given that one with authority to watch over them, and because of that, they honor and respect and submit to that person. This is your whole life. What happens in this area of your life is your whole life. And so therefore, this is very important. This is God's wise counsel about how he has ordered his world and therefore how to live within these relationships. I pray that you'll stick with us through this study so that you can learn more too about the blessing of living in God's ways in these holy orders and estates, what your duties and responsibilities are in order that all things might go well with you. Look forward to seeing you back next time on this Bible study. God's peace be with you until then.